All right, welcome back to the show. So I got a real special guest in the house today. I don't know if it's. I look at Leslie and I'm thinking, man, I don't know if this is I think of like a GI Joe and a Inspector Gadget, kind of hybrid.
I appreciate the compliment.
Appreciate you being on.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. So tell our listeners exactly who are you and what you do, man. I've seen you, in my news feed on Facebook for years. Mm-hmm. I see fast cars, I see helicopters, I see guns, but I know you're an interesting fella. Thank you. And I don't really know where to put my finger on you.
Well, there's a lot of places to throw darts at.
Okay.
So the backstory: born and raised in Silver Creek, local boy. And it's funny. I just had this conversation with a friend yesterday. What I have now is not really a reflection of where I came from.
Okay.
I worked at the mill. My whole family worked at the mill back when the mill was operational. And I had a particularly hard job. I worked in the weave room on third shift. And in the Army, we call it embrace the suck.
Right.
Well, I learned embrace the suck before I got to the Army. So, Dad worked in the mill, Mom worked at the Salvation Army, just a typical Silver Creek family.
Yeah.
And then went to Pepperell, and funny story there. So, and I do not, let me go ahead and preface this by saying I don't recommend anybody to drop out of school. I did because there was no need to keep trying because my grades were straight Fs. My 10th grade report card is framed on my office wall over my patents. It was straight Fs. The highest grade was a 53.
Was it because you were like, you just didn't have interest in school, or you actually just didn't, it just wasn't clicking with you?
I think both.
Both?
I think both. According to my college transcript, which I attempted to go one semester at Floyd College and was put on academic probation, it said math deficient. So I thought, you know what? I'm just not going to try to add letters and numbers. They won't add, so I'm not trying. But then I went from that to, and I'll tell you a story that kind of put me on the path where I'm at today.
Yeah.
It kind of got me down the entrepreneurship path. Many years ago, I worked at Quick Tune and Lube, and then I went in the Army when I was 23, so it would have been before that. And I was down in the pit one day changing the oil. That's what I did. Whatever year that would have been, if you pulled up, I was the guy down in the pit changing the oil. And I would never have thought later that the situation is what it is today.
Right.
This guy pulls up in a Mercedes, and I never knew him, and he never knew me, but he had a profound effect on me. So the way that particular engine is, the oil filter's on the front. So when you take the oil off, it's going to get on your hands. There's no way around it, and it's hot oil.
Yep. So
I drop his oil filter, and while the oil's draining, there's nothing we can do while the oil's draining. It burnt my hand. I'm walking up the steps to go put cold water on my arm. It's hurt.
Right.
This guy, who was obviously very wealthy, had a very nice Mercedes. He had a very nice watch. At the time, I didn't know what a Rolex was. I do now. He had a very nice suit. And he snapped at me and looked at me. He said, in a very angry tone, he looked at his watch and goes, "Can you hurry up? I've got somewhere I need to be." Well, I couldn't say anything to him. I got fired.
Right.
And it was like $250, $280 a week, whatever I was making. I needed it. I can't get fired. I can't get fired. So I just sucked it up. And when I was back running the cold water on my arm, I made a promise to myself. I said, no matter what I have or what I don't have, I'll never be that guy.
Yeah.
And I thought he had to do something to get where he is. And I realized quickly that, he has nice things. He has a nice car. He has nice, all these things. And I'm down in a pit changing oil. And I thought, I want to be where he is. And I realized that working a 9-to-5 job for me, and I'm not making, comments.
Yeah, I get it. Yep.
But for me, that wasn't what I wanted to do. So that kind of put me on the path of inventing. And that is a long story that we can cover, but that got me where I am today.
Well, yeah, and speaking of the Lindale Mill, my family worked at the mill.
Okay.
My dad was an electrician there. He's got a lot of videos of him hanging the star between the stacks.
I'm on the star crew now.
And his mom worked at the mill. And matter of fact, I told him that we were going to be doing an episode today, and he said he knew your dad, Paul.
Yes, Paul Duke. Yeah,
so he knew your dad very well.
Yeah, Dad and Buddy Rayburn were the power plant engineers. They were the two guys that were responsible for making sure the turbine ran. So I remember as a small child, 2, 3, 4 in the morning. Now this is back when we had landlines. Cell phone doesn't exist. The phone would ring, and Dad would have to get up and go in at whatever time it was and fire off the turbine.
Wow.
And he and Buddy Rayburn were the only two people in the mill that did that. And, when you have that position, you don't have hours. You do what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And I remember a lot of times he'd get up weird hours, come home late, because in the summer, Georgia Power would cut their power supply off, so they had to make their own. because the load was too great. They had to send it to civilian customers, and they would fire off the turbine. And I learned a lot of I had this conversation literally this morning with a friend of mine. I learned my work ethic from him, that nothing's given to you. You know, you got to make it happen. You got to go, you got to dig, you got to make it happen.
So would you say you grew up kind of, you know, middle class, poor? Or?
I would say, well, I've come to find out a few years ago, after both my parents passed away, going through some of the old family stuff, that my grandmother on my mom's side was on food stamps. I didn't know that. So I would say I grew up lower to middle class. There's technically 9 social classes. We typically say lower, middle, and upper, but there's technically 9.
Okay.
Lower, middle, lower, and you got the middle,
tiers.
Middle, lower, middle, upper, and it goes on up. So I would say I would be lower middle class. Yeah.
So when you were down in that oil pit and you that light bulb went off in your head,
the epiphany.
This is, you know, you could tell that working your normal 9 to 5 wasn't going to get you to that dream you aspired. You know, you got inspired by seeing that guy with the Mercedes. Yeah. Like how old were you then?
Oh, I would have been I went in the Army in 23, so that would have been 20, 21, 22.
Okay. So how do you transition from the thought to actual action? You said you just wake up one morning and say, I'm going to invent something, or
yes and no.
Have you always tinkered with stuff as a kid?
I've always tinkered with stuff. And I have to throw out some credit here, and I'm still in contact with him today. The teacher most responsible for firing up my imagination and putting me on the path, and everybody that went to Pepperell is going to know the name I'm fixing to throw out, Mr. Brookshire.
Okay, yeah.
I'm still in touch with Mr. Brookshire. We communicate regularly. We both have a passion for cars. He has a beautiful Ford Model T. I've been over to his house and check it out. That's his pride and possession, just like my cars are to me. But Mr. Brookshire, a quick story, in the 6th grade, he was our middle school science teacher. And we were experimenting with batteries and lights and things. And if you add more batteries, the lights get brighter. Mm-hmm. Well, as an adult, we know that. But as a small child, you're like, why does that do that? So I was experimenting with that and changing it in different ways and things. And I asked Mr. Brookshire to come over and ask him, why does this do this? And he looked at me and goes, I don't know, Leslie, you tell me. Which was his way of saying, you figured it out. I'm not giving you the answer.
Wow.
Mr. Brookshire always nurtured that. And it wasn't just me, any student that was in his class. He always nurtured that. Go figure it out.
Right.
Make it happen. So I have to give a lot of credit to Mr. Brookshire. And he kind of fired up the tinkering side of me.
And this was in
middle school.
Middle school.
And you take that seed that was planted early from Mr. Brookshire to the situation with the gentleman in the Mercedes, and you put those two together, and at least in my experience, for me, that equals success.
Yeah, and I've always had a little entrepreneur bone in me, but like I've never thought to try to invent something. Which I watch a lot of Shark Tank. I'm not sure if you've ever watched it or not. But
I have. The thing about Shark Tank, and funny you mentioned Shark Tank, is this. So, as you know, I do have some pretty successful products, and Shark Tank, those guys, what they'll do, and I'm comparing what they do versus what I do. Shark Tank will take your idea and they'll give you some money to make your idea, your concept, your prototype a viable, what we call product on pallet, get it in production, get it in store so people buy it. But they'll take 60, 80% of the ownership of your product.
Wow.
You don't own it. Now, when you start getting investors, that is, you got to slice up the pie. But typically, unless you're just, crawling to venture capitalist guys on your hands and knees, you shouldn't be giving up 60, 80%.
Right.
So about 2 years ago, I actually started a consultation service. It's on Facebook. It's Invention Consultation Services. I've had so many people come to me and say, hey, man, I know what you've done in the past. Can you help me with an idea? And that's what I do. And I don't take any percentage. I just have a flat hourly rate. I don't want a percentage of you earned it. You get
okay.
it. So, and that way, and don't ever go to these people and what is it called? And I'm not going to throw out any names. I don't want to be casting shade on anybody, but you see it on TV and they're like, send us your idea and we will help you. No, they won't.
They'll steal it.
They'll steal it because
oh man,
once you send that to them, they won't sign a confidentiality agreement, which is what you want if it's not yet patent pending. And if you send it to them, you might as well just have given up because now they're going to run with it. So
yeah, the only time I ever thought of an idea, and I don't mind saying it because if somebody wants to steal it, and they probably already have it on certain model vehicles, and I was young when I thought of this, and I think I had called it ESDS, onboard ESDS, electronic scent displacement system. It was my idea because I used to clean cars, detail cars, and everybody would want me to leave an air freshener and make it smell good.
Sure.
So I was like, how cool would it be if if there was like a cartridge on the dash where you could screw in a bottle of your favorite scent, right? And it had like some kind of pump or tubes going out through the car, and under each seat had like a little mister. So you could just press a button on the steering wheel or dash, and it would just put out a small mist of a fragrance.
The fragrance of your choice.
Yes. Onboard ESDS. And I was going to sell it. I was going to write up a paper and send it to Ford. Never did do it. But hey, if you want to take it, go ahead. As of right now, I don't think I've never been in a vehicle, but in my mind, they're probably thinking, man, people can go by and get $1 little leaf and hang in their mirror. Is that really going to be a feature on a vehicle that makes us sell more cars? I don't know, but I don't know, man. But
you have the thing now that actually clips into your vent,
right?
That will blow it out in there and things like that.
Yeah,
and it's funny you mention that. So the very first thing I tell somebody, you ask about how the path to inventing is this. Let me give you an example. If you walk in Home Depot right now, you too can spend $19.95 of your hard-earned money to buy a magnet on a stick.
Yes.
Okay, so somebody at some point went, I need to pick up nails. I need to pick up things that are metal.
Oh, yeah, they even got the ones on wheels.
Exactly.
Where you can go around like a construction site.
Yes, and it picks them up.
Love it, yeah.
So somebody said, I have a great idea. I wonder if it's out there. So many ideas get not necessarily stolen from you, but because people don't pursue them because they think somebody else has done it.
They just assume it's already been done.
And we have a product now. Savannah actually co-developed a equine bucket. I'll get to that in a minute. So that magnet on the stick, somebody patented it, and now nobody else can do it. And Home Depot said, thank you very lots. And now somebody's sipping martinis on their island.
Right.
Because they pursued that idea.
And that goes back to that mailbox money we were talking about.
Mailbox money. Yes, you don't want to build a $100 million factory, and people say, well, if I invent something, what are my options? Well, you have several. If you have a lot of money, then, of course, you can build a factory and hire employees and deal with that nightmare, which I don't recommend.
Manufacturing.
Oh, no. Or what I have done is you build a proof of concept prototype, get it working, get the idea polished, get all your bugs worked out, and then you build what's called a pre-production prototype, something you can present to interested companies.
Yeah, like you would spend a little bit more money on the prototype.
Exactly.
Make it
polish
look
it up. Yeah, make it look good, and then present it to them. And then you have three options, or any combination. Typically, when you change hands with IP, there are three options. An outright purchase up front, cash up front, some money up front, and some money per part produced, and then nothing up front and more per part produced, or any combination thereof. And that's mailbox money. So if somebody buys something, you get a check every month.
What do you think about the guy that invented, I just think of some of the simplest stuff like Velcro or the little plastic things on the end of your shoestrings?
That is one of the most valuable patents ever. Because they're on every pair of shoes.
Yeah, and that's like an invention. Somebody invented that.
It is. Again, if you take the conversation we discussed before we went on air, if you got a penny a piece,
oh my gosh,
how many millions a month would it be?
And that's just and that person necessarily didn't start a factory making them. He's just got the patent, and it's like a licensing.
You would do a
licensing
thing. You can do a licensing to where you maintain ownership of the intellectual property.
There you go.
Then now you have two types of license: an exclusive and non-exclusive. Non-exclusive means 20 different companies can make it and sell it for different applications. Exclusive means this company has it. Period. Nobody else can make it, distribute it.
Well, apparently that little plastic thing on the end of shoestrings, everybody's got it.
It is worth a lot of money.
Yeah.
Now, the thing about a patent is they're only good between 15 and 20 years. After that, anybody and everybody, and they will copy your technology.
Wow.
So you have a finite amount of time to print as much money as you can.
So the guy that invented that little plastic piece, his time probably ran up at some point.
It ran out decades ago.
Oh,
yeah.
And somebody else probably snatched it up.
Sure. Now, anybody can make it, and they do not owe him any royalties of any kind.
Dang.
Because it's open market at that point.
Did he have the first dibs to renew it? Could he have not have been like, hey, that's mine, I want to keep it?
No.
You can't do that?
Once your patent time is up, it's up.
Really?
Yeah. You got about 15 years, 20 years depending, and that's it.
Why don't they do that in office?
And what now?
Yes. Why don't they do that in the political office where once you
would be great. Yes. And maybe some senility testing.
So, because you hear about these people that's like
been there 60 years.
60 years. It's got corrupt, I'm like, they should have like a limit on that.
Yeah. Well, and it's to touch base before mine turns to water and run out my ears. You talked about, people thinking something has been done. Let me give you an example.
Yeah.
So, and this is This is not really a typical story, but if you have a good product, it can be typical. So Savannah has several horses. You've seen her horses on Facebook.
Beautiful.
And she's got these big, expensive race horses. And I call one of them the Ferrari pony because it's literally worth more than my Ferrari.
Really?
It is, by a factor of a lot. It's a serious racehorse. But anyway, so we were feeding this horse one day. And these horses require a special diet. Their supplements, their vitamins, all this stuff. It can be $30 to $50 to $70 a bucket of food. And I put the food down, And as I turn around to speak to her, I hear the very distinctive sound of a bucket going over the fence. And you can hear it, thunk, and it lands over there. And I look around at Savannah and I said, is there a better way to do this? She goes, nope, that's state of the art.
Like throwing a bucket over
a fence. Yeah, throwing a bucket.
You
You can spill the bucket and it knocks the food over, knocks the water over.
Right.
And I said, is there a better way? And she said, no, that's state of the art. If there was a better product, I'd know about it and I'd be using it. And I went, you sure there's not a better way? And she went, no. I said, oh, okay. So I pulled a Howard Hughes, if you're familiar with Howard Hughes. I literally took some plywood and a hand jigsaw that I remember my dad had when I was 10, 15 years old. I still have it. Went in the carport and made the world's first, and now it's patent pending, so it's the only.
Wow.
Interlocking, no tip, no spill bucket for the equine industry and the pet industry and the paint industry. And because nobody had thought of the interlock on a bucket, the intellectual property covers, and this is long, so here's what it covers. Any bucket made out of any material of any size for any use in any industry utilizing any type of interlocking mechanism.
Wow.
There's a lot. It's not just equine. It's the pet industry. It's the animal rescue industry. It's Jeff that used to be the director of Paws. We went out and spoke to him one day. He gave us a tour out there.
Yeah.
They spend about 40 man-hours a week flipping bucket food and water buckets back over and refilling them because until now there was nothing out there that was a no-tip, no-spill bucket. And that saves them 40 man-hours a week. So it's not just a market in that. It's a market in the pet industry. If you have a dog on a chain release or in his pen and he knocks his bucket over.
Right, yeah.
Not anymore.
Golly.
So that product has been purchased by an international equine company, and she sells to not only through her company, but she sells through SmartPack. She sells through Chewy, which is an online pet company. She is in Dover Saddlery, which is a very high-end saddle equine company. She sells in Tractor Supply, and she's getting in Walmart. So that bucket's about to go global.
It's funny you say that because when I used to work for, doing the stump grinding or even installing satellite TV on people's homes, I was at a lot of different homes every day. And I would go out in the backyard, and I would see a dog tied up to a tree. And sure enough,
bucket's flipped over.
The bucket's flipped over, and he has no water.
Yes.
I'm like, it's like 100 degrees outside.
Yes.
And I would go get it and fill it back up for it, and it would just sit there and it would go through a whole bowl, and I'd have to refill it.
Yes.
So you're saying your product has solved this?
All that.
Man.
Yes. And Animal Control here, I'm friends with all those guys. They can't tell you how many calls they've gone out to for a welfare check on an animal called in from a neighbor. Exact same thing.
It's sad.
It's flipped over and hadn't had water in hours. If they've gone on vacation, they're going on business, whatever, the dog needs water. So this solves all that. And that's one of those things that went from, this kind of goes back how I want to help people with new ideas. Just because if you see a problem, like that bucket was a problem, they spilled it, don't assume somebody else has done it. That's how a lot of people get passed up on pretty serious revenue is they go, well, I'm sure that's out there. Don't say I'm sure. Call your patent attorney and find out. If you don't have a patent attorney, I can help you get one. And it's called a patentability search. So if you have a new, the newest mousetrap, the best mousetrap, the very first thing you do, which is what I did with the bucket, is you call your patent attorney and go, hey, I need a patentability search. Well, a patentability search basically says, they will compare your idea, your concept, your prototype, to everything else in the related prior art. Now, prior art means anything remotely close to what you did.
Yeah.
It's going to come back one of two ways. Patentable merit, which means, proceed and make some money, or unpatentable, because either it's exactly like something else or it's so close that, you can't differentiate the difference.
Yeah. And then you got I guess that goes for like other countries too, right?
It does. Yeah.
It checks everything.
Absolutely. And it's funny when my patent attorney is Dorian Kennedy, and he called me, this guy's $400 an hour. So when he calls me, the clock's ticking. But he calls me on a Sunday night on his time and on his dime, and it was about the bucket. And he goes, Leslie, I've been a patent attorney for 30 years, and twice has a product or an idea, a concept been brought to me that had absolutely no prior art, which means nothing close existed. He said, your bucket's one of those.
Man.
So it's one of those things that if you see a problem, come up with a solution and then proceed down that path. Don't think somebody else did it. They may be thinking the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So what was your first legit, like, or what was one of your first ideas that either didn't work out or did? Like, you could go both ways there. Like, tell me some of your failures, and tell me one of your first successful.
I will, because in order to have success, you have to have failure.
Right.
You have to. So the first failure was, and it may exist now, I don't know. Matter of fact, it does exist. I saw it at AutoZone. It does exist. Being a motorhead, both motorcycles and cars, you're all the time changing oil, adding fluid, doing this, doing that. So I came up with basically it was a spout that you could put on your oil that had like a backflow that the oil would, I could drain a quart of oil in about 4 seconds.
Right.
It wouldn't go blip, 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 blip.
Yeah, because it makes a mess when you pour it.
It does. So this had a tube inside it that would relieve the negative pressure inside the quart of oil.
Make it pour smoother.
And it just pours instantly.
Consistently.
Yes. Yeah. And I built a prototype. I tested it. It worked. And we still had the hobby shop. So I would have been 17, 18. Never did anything with it. And come to find out later, you can go buy one now at AutoZone.
And how does it, is it like a?
It's similar. It's very similar. Yeah, you screw it on, and it's got a tube within a tube, and it allows the air to come in so you don't get that vacuum inside. And it did the exact same thing. It just did it in a different way.
And I totally get it, because I couldn't tell you how many times I'd be so focused. I'd have that quart of oil, and I'd get it right over the hole,
and you miss
and it gets going, and then all of a sudden a big boom, and it spills all over the valve cover, and I'm like, I got to wipe it up because I don't want to smell burning smoke and whatever else.
Right. And then I had another one that I never really pursued, which was we put sprinklers in our yard to water the yard, water trees, whatnot. And I come up with a device that was and I thought about it for more the retirees in your nice communities where you have good landscaping and things. And it's basically, this is probably out there and somebody wants to steal it, go ahead if it's not. Think of about a 270-degree circle with legs on it with a hose that you connect here with drip holes all the way around. So you just set it at the base of each tree.
Okay.
So you don't waste any water. It drips down on that tree.
Yeah.
And every 2 hours you just move it.
I got you.
And I never pursued
it's like just a drip.
It's just a drip.
A drip.
Yeah, and it just puts it all around the root system so it goes 360 all the way down. I never pursued it. It may be out there. I don't know. I'm not really a horticulturist guy. So I don't know. But the first success was actually a precision alignment tool for, I was racing motorcycles at the time. This would have been late 90s, and it was a precision alignment tool for sport bikes and dirt bikes. That was my very first patent.
When you say alignment tool, for like aligning?
So basically it takes the whole drivetrain of the motorcycle, the rear tire, the chain, the sprockets, the brakes, all that. And if you go buy a brand new sport bike, if where the swing arm pivots to the frame, you can put it's a threaded, if I remembered the patent number, I could tell you, and you can Google it, but it's been a while. So it's a threaded rod with two tapered cones that go in the pivot point where the swing arm pivots.
Gotcha.
And at the back, you do the same thing, and you measure that distance. And by the sheer mechanics of how it's assembled, it's going to be perfect. You go buy a brand new bike, and it'll be off half an inch.
Really? So
absolutely. They just slam them together at the factory.
And you invented a alignment tool.
Yes. And at the time, I got sport rider and motorcyclist and all this, and I sent that prototype to Kent Kunisugu, who was the chief editor of Sport Rider magazine. They tested it on their race bikes at their track, and he says, "Man, we love this thing. Can I feature this in our what's called the new gear bag section of our magazine so people can order it from you?" And I said, "That would be a nightmare because you have the only one in existence."
Because you hadn't made them yet.
I hadn't made them yet. That was the only one. And he goes, "Please let me know when this goes into production. I'll get you some publicity on this." Well, about the time I finished that, I was working on the second one, which a lot of people know about. It was in the paper here in Rome a lot. It was the projectile recovery system.
Yeah, which I'm glad you brought that up because that was one that I knew about and one I got to actually see in person over when you had the museum in town.
Yes, and a funny story about that. That was going on at the same time the DC sniper shootings were occurring. It had already, I'd already sold some, GBI crime lab.
This is what year?
Man, I don't remember this. I invented it in the late 90s. So I think the shooting was in 2003, 2004.
Yeah, early 2000s.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they were using a Bushmaster 5.56. And I don't want to give any credit to these murderers for what they did, but from a tactical standpoint, what they did is they crawled in the trunk of the vehicle. They had the rear seats where they could, from inside the car, tinted windows, they'd go in the trunk. Had a hole drilled in the back of the car back. The old-timey cars had a keyhole for the trunk.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they were using a suppressor. I think they were. Even if inside the trunk, it would just been muffled. And they were firing. They'd pick a target, and they would fire 200-300 yards away from inside a trunk. You never saw anybody move. There was no.
It's just a car sitting there.
It's just a car sitting there. So that car would just crank and pull away. And typically, when somebody gets shot, everybody's attention goes to the person that just got hit.
Right.
And particularly civilians. In the military, the first thing you do is look where the shot came from. Unless you're a medic, then you tend the wounded guy. But typically the guy with the bang sticks, we point and go that way. But the car just simply pulled away, and it didn't attract any attention because nobody came and went from the car. So from a tactical standpoint, it's pretty clever.
Yeah. Man.
So I knew they were using a 5.56, and because they recovered a couple of cartridge cases. And I called. I said, "Look, I can help with this," because they said, "If anybody can help us, please call." The FBI put out this tip line. Well, this system is so sensitive, it can capture a 5.56 ballistic tip intact without damaging the tip, and it still has the powder residue on the projectile.
Wow.
Which is a big deal. You can do a residual match. So I call that number, and I get bounced around to about 20, 30 different people. And back when we had the hobby shop, I used to have this guy's name and number taped on the wall as a reminder. I wish I still had it. I would have it on a board similar to you have over there, except kind of the inverse of that.
Yeah.
He was the director of the FBI crime lab. And I finally got connected with him, and I introduced myself. I said, "Hello, my name is Leslie Duke. I have invented this new product. It's been verified by the GBI crime lab. Jay Jarvis was the director here at the crime lab. He fired into it. He verified it. Jason Flater was their ballistician. He did an AFTI peer review article on it, Association of Firearms and 2 marks examiners. I mean, it was legit. It was verified. It worked. Well, when I tell the director of the FBI crime lab during the shootings that I can help them, that I will, at my cost, put my unit on a trailer and bring it to D.C. to help them.
I'm sorry. So how does your product help a crime that's already happened?
Okay.
I'm more confused.
Sure. So we'll back up a little bit. So when a murder occurs or a shooting occurs with a firearm, the way that they connect the dots is you will remove the projectile from the victim, okay? And then to ensure that you have the murder weapon, you will fire another round from the suspected weapon into a water tank. So the water tank, this is my product replaces the water tank.
Gotcha.
The water tank is this big, huge vertical swimming pool. And you shoot a round into it, and they have various methods of recovering the round from the bottom. In full metal jacket pistol rounds, it does fine, but high velocity rifle rounds, even full metal jacket, they disintegrate. Hitting water at 3,250 feet a second is like hitting a concrete wall. The projectile explodes.
Gotcha.
So when you go to court, you have the prosecution and the defense, and you have, you basically have a split computer screen. And it's a 40 power magnification, and typically people call them riflings, but their technical term is striations, stray. And you will compare those. You take the one from the bullet recovered from the body to the projectile fired from the suspected murder weapon, and
you try to get a match.
You try to get a match. Now, what happens a lot is they have to download rifle rounds, and download means take a lot of the powder out to slow it down so it doesn't just frag out when it hits the water. Well, 2 things can happen. Number one, depending on certain circumstances, that round can blow up, because certain powder does not lend itself well to downloading. You run into some pretty serious issues. And then the pressure is not the same because you're going a lot slower.
So it's not an apples to apples like test.
And the defense attorneys will get on that and go, "Hey, look, that's a different pressure." And, they try to get the case kicked out. There's been a lot of murders that got off because of that.
Man.
Well, with this, you can fire full power rounds of the exact same type of ammunition from the exact same weapon, and it would be 100% intact as if you caught it in midair. Literally just
on your product. And what do you call this thing? I just remember this big black block.
Well, that's the bulletproof composite. That's different. This is a projectile recovery system.
Wow.
The Duke Projectile Recovery System, or DPRS for short. So, I knew it could do what they needed done. So I'm on the
wonder. Yeah, I'd be calling them up too, man.
Yeah, and I have a very brief conversation with the director of the FBI crime lab, because he said, and I quote, "Leslie, if this could be done, we would already be doing it," and hung up on me.
Wow.
So
they think they just got it all. They all figured out.
Absolutely. And, typically with any industry that's been using the same technology for 100 years, when you bring something new in, I went to a crime lab in Alabama demonstrating it to the director of the crime lab. And at this point, it's this device on a trailer, taking it to labs to show them. And because when you try to upset the apple cart of an entire industry, I forget who made the was it Carl Sagan that said extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence? I think it was Carl Sagan. And I had extraordinary evidence. I mean, in one instance, I had a crime lab director fire a round into it, pull out the hollow point projectile. It was still so hot he couldn't hold it. He looked at it, It was from his ammo, from his weapon. And he said, I know what I saw, but I still don't believe it. Walked away and slammed the door.
What?
So just because you have the best mousetrap doesn't mean success will come easy. You still have to fight for that success.
Man.
To make a long story short, that product later on went worldwide and had product representation in 53 countries. So
did this product produce some mailbox money?
This product produced some mailbox money.
Okay.
And it's put a lot of people in jail. Now, I was never, because being the inventor of the technology, I was told to be expected to call to be an expert witness in cases it was used in. But talking to my law enforcement contacts in GBI and FBI, they told me later on that if the defense team found out this technology was being used to prosecute the case, that they didn't really fight it because there's no way to fight the results.
Really? And it was that strong?
It was that strong, and I was never called to testify.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm getting confused because the one time I was over at your museum, you had this I think it was like a rubber block.
That's the bulletproof composite.
That's not the thing you were just talking about.
No,
so what are the thing you were just talking about, the recovery thing? What did it wasn't water, but what did it look like?
It was a combination of different material in very specific densities and combinations that will take a high velocity rifle round like a 5.56 and stops it in about 6 feet perfectly intact. A 45 hollow point will stop.
So was it like a big block?
No,
of rubber too?
No, it was contained inside of a metal box. They were 2 feet by 2 feet by 8 feet long.
Gotcha.
On wheels, about the size of your desk. It's square, and you just pushed it around and whatnot.
Sweet.
Yeah, but it was used specifically to solve firearms crimes and put bad guys in jail.
50 different countries.
53 different countries.
And you got to do some traveling with that. I think you actually went and...
I did. The traveling I did with that, the coolest traveling with that particular product, most of the traveling was with the other one.
Okay.
But and there was some cool traveling there. But with this product, the coolest traveling was the Ecuadorian state police bought some for the entire country of Ecuador. And I spent a month in Quito, the capital of Ecuador, teaching every officer they had of the state police how to use this technology. And that was pretty cool.
Man,
that was pretty cool.
This was in the early 2000s.
I'd have to go back and check, but somewhere in that area. Yeah, it all runs together. I'm old. My brain goes, and I don't remember things. But
so all I know was about probably 10 years ago, I was at your museum, and you said, you want to see something cool? I said, sure. And Ricky Robinson was there.
Yeah.
And we were there trying to put a holographic sight on my AR-15. And anyway, I stepped in this garage type space. There's this I think it was like a rubber block sitting there.
Yeah, it was a block. Yeah.
And all of a sudden I see this fully automatic belt fed.
Yeah, it was a 249 saw
machine gun. Yeah. And you just blast off I forgot how many hundreds of rounds into this block. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, the block's still intact. It don't look like it's even been shot.
Right.
It just absorbed
it did.
the bullet. So what was that thing about? And when did you invent that?
So that's a long story. That product actually exists because of a good friend of mine that was in, everybody knows it as the movie Black Hawk Down, but actually we call it Operation Gothic Serpent. His name was Sean Nelson. So Sean was a good friend of mine. He actually years ago was my Ducati mechanic. And Sean was not only in the real battle, but Sean is actually in the movie, and he was an advisor on the set. And there is a scene there, in the movie, the guy that goes deaf from shooting the M60, that's my buddy Sean. He went deaf for 3 days. He shot the barrel out of his M60. I mean, they went through, that was 18, 20 hours of hell. But a bunch of guys got wounded because they didn't have any cover. There's one scene in the movie that he and his saw gunner are there, and they're just hiding behind this pile of junk, and they're taking fire. And the best thing we have until this came out was sandbags. Well, sandbags have been around for 100 years. And the thing about a sandbag is if you concentrate the fire on it, the sand pours out, and now you have no more protection.
Man,
even if you have them stacked up 3 feet deep,
right?
If you had enough .22 ammo, you could technically drill a hole in it because it's just going to pour out. And I thought, well, there's got to be a better way. We were talking about Mom and Dad in Ridgewood. I grew up in Ridgewood, and the house is still there. It looks a little different now, but number 8 Ridgedale Drive is where I grew up. And if you drive by there now, you'll see the big shop to the left is where I used to keep all the motorcycles, but there's a little bitty shop between it and the house. That was the lawnmower shop. The DPRS, the projectile recovery system, and the bulletproof composite, both of the initial testing was done in that building.
Really?
Now imagine this. Here it is, the mid-90s, okay?
Yeah,
Ridgewood.
So your neighbors hate you?
They did, because I would have to roll the lawnmowers out. And at that time, I didn't own any fully automatic weapons. I didn't have the license. I had a semi-auto AR-15. And I would have to roll all the lawnmowers out. and fire 300-400 rounds inside a lawnmower shop.
Are you serious? In a neighborhood?
In Ridgewood. Absolutely.
I'm assuming you had some cops called on you.
The cops knew me. They used to hang out, at the museum and the
oh man,
hobby shop and all this, and I knew a lot of them. And a couple of times the cops did show up and go, "Hey, what's going on?" And I said, "Look, I'm okay. Can you tell us?" "No." "Okay." And that was it. And I guess they kind of told dispatch, "Hey, look, we know this guy. He's not a lunatic. He's not shooting up the neighborhood. He's doing something legit."
Okay.
Now that was in the 90s. You probably couldn't do that today. They would ask you politely to stop that. But in the 90s, it was a little different situation. But both those products were actually the initial testing of the initial material was in that building that's still there today, in the middle of Ridgewood.
Wow! And so that material that you talked about, what is the point of that? It's just so you can do some target practice.
No. It was designed specifically for military applications. So, like I said, sandbags and HESCO. You see HESCO bears in Afghanistan. So HESCO is basically just a big industrial sandbag. It's a 6x6 by about 5 feet tall sandbag. They fill it full of rocks and whatever.
And the sandbags are for protection.
Yeah, so there's nothing that'll really stop huge volumes of fire, explosives, all this, and those products don't really attach together. If you remember the shape of that block, it's like a 1 foot square Lego. So all of it, it's
interlocking.
It's interlocking. Yeah, the patent for this is hanging on my wall. It's the world's first interlocking 3-dimensional protection system, which is actually what it's called, 3D IPS. And not only was it bulletproof and blast proof, you could ram through it because when you locked all the blocks together, it acted like a big,
That's perfect because then you got Humvees that could come at you.
Sure.
Try to run over your barricade.
Yeah,
your wall.
Yeah, they're called V-bids. And they would take, they would armor bulldozers. This is, of course, Afghanistan, Iraq, all this. They would take vehicles and fill them up with explosives. And then they got particularly nasty. They were actually putting it in cement mixers. They were armoring bulldozers and making V-bids out of those. So,
did you get to capture? I mean, this is happening. Sounds like after 9/11.
Yeah, this was a little past that. I forget the exact.
You probably could have, if you could have. I mean, if you would have been a few years ahead of 9/11, you would have been probably sitting even on a bigger gold mine because you know how much security and money went into
hundreds of billions, and
military.
A lot of it was on the black side, and we'll never know how much it was because you have two budgets: the public budget and the black budget.
Right.
And there's only about 12 people, the majestic 12 guys, whoever they are, they know about the black side of it, but. It's one of those things to where it took a lot to get the military's attention, but once you get their attention, you have their undivided attention. And the test that did that was stopping 5 RPGs. An RPG, a standard RPG, the 7V warhead will burn through about 22 inches of steel. And then you have the RPG-29 Vampire, and you have all these various different, types of RPGs. But typically the most common is the 7, and it just, as we see it over in the war going on right now, everybody's got an RPG. They're like rocks.
Right.
And that warhead is designed to burn a hole through steel and blow up a tank, and they'll take out pretty much anything. But what really got the government's attention is when we did a test with this material, and we marked out about an 8-inch by 8-inch area, and it stopped 5 RPGs in that 8-inch by 8-inch area in 4 inches.
Man.
At that point, my phone exploded. I had their undivided attention.
Yeah, so is this, I know it's been, almost 20 years ago, but is any of these products still in use? Has your patent ran up on it yet?
So the patent has ran out, and the intellectual property has since changed hands. So it doesn't matter to me if the patent.
You sold it?
Yeah, the patent. It's like, bye, go away. So
really?
So I no longer own the IP. And it ran out. I think it was like 8 months ago, something like that. But the IP changed hands years ago, so it doesn't matter. Yeah.
So you got the patent that has a certain time and value, then you got the intellectual property that has a certain.
That's the same thing.
Oh, it's the same thing.
The patent is the intellectual property.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so, and what you want to do, like I said, is you want to make as much money as you can within that window of opportunity, because after that, now this is a little different. You'd have to have some very specialized, even if you had a block in your possession, you'd have to have some very specialized equipment to be able to know the exact composition. You could break it down if you Dow Chemical probably could.
Right.
But there's also some what we call the magic on the inside. There's some special stuff in there too. So, yeah.
Man, so like, where do you even start? Like, where do you to invent a block like that material? Is this something you just went to like Ace Hardware and bought? You had to get some raw materials online. How do you even figure that out? Like, was it even like? You may not be able to say, but.
There's some of it that's still classified. I can't talk about. Although the patent runs out, the classification does not.
Okay.
And you ask about the different countries. So the other countries I've been to was because of that product. I was a guest of their country. I spent a month in Rio de Janeiro as a guest of the Brazilian government. I will never forget that. That I can talk about. There's some other countries I've been to and some other things I've done and locations and people I've worked with that I'll never be able to discuss. And a lot of those people don't exist. Neither do the places we were at. But to go back to your question, so the very first test of this was, believe it or not, they make plastic, and I think it's made out of HDPE, which is high-density polyethylene. Same thing, the 55-gallon plastic drums are made out of. They make cross ties, plastic cross ties. They make plastic decking, and if you want to use wood on your deck, you can use plastic. And I tried dozens of different materials, and one of them was weird. This company's since been out of business, but it came from a company down in South Georgia, and it was this weird bluish-green, very hard block. And it was so hard that a 45 round, because you test it with different calibers to test, what will go in, what will not go in. And I was testing it with pistol calibers before I worked my way up to rifle calibers. The 45 caliber round bounced off. So I called this company and I said, "Hey man, what is this stuff? I'm getting blowback here." And they goes, "That is recycled baby diapers."
What?
Yeah. And at that point I didn't want to pick it up anymore, but it was, and I don't know the process, but it took recycled baby diapers, and it was so hard that a 45, 230 grain FMJ bounced off, which doesn't typically work for, that.
Right,
you want it to, as you saw when you were there, there's no ricochet. It absorbs it. So it has to be soft enough for everything to come in, but then it has to stay in.
Right.
And that's the trick.
So you basically just started playing around with different materials until
different materials,
worked.
Different technologies, different combinations. I had a vision of what it needed to do. And then during that process, got in touch with Dow Chemical. I'm a ballistics guy. I'm not a chemist. And I brought in their lead chemist. Well, I was having meetings with the executive vice president of Dow on a regular basis, Dow Chemical. And, their engineers are there, their team. And about every week we had a phone call. And I said, okay, this is what it's doing. This is what I need it to do. And then they would send out a fresh batch of material and we test. And it went from a product on a napkin, which the very first concept was literally drawn on a napkin at a country club in Atlanta, to about 3.5 years later, product on pallet.
Dang. Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of business owners can take that same concept, or entrepreneurs, like as an entrepreneur, and you already got that motivation instilled in you. You feel like you got to do it all and know it all, but you can delegate. And what's wrong with hiring somebody that right. can get you to where you want to be?
Well, and you got a good point. One of the first things I tell people is this, and this applies to a lot of things in life, but in the entrepreneurship field and inventing, nobody knows everything. And I use a very simple phrase: teamwork makes the dream work.
Yeah. Because
without the team, you're not going to have the dream. I'm not a chemist. I'm a ballistics guy. I can't say I'm an engineer because I don't have a degree. I dropped out of high school and college, but I tend to lean more to that side of things. I don't know much about chemistry except you don't take sodium metal and throw it in a pool. You will no longer have a pool.
Right.
But you bring in people that can help you, and typically in a situation, if you got two options: either you can hire them, or you can give them a little slice of the pie.
Right. Yeah.
And say, hey, look, if you want to come on the team, I'll give you this %. And then when this makes $1 trillion, you do the numbers. Here's what your payout is.
And a lot of times people show interest in that, and it's worth it to them because they see the vision too.
Sure. If somebody's willing to either invest their time or money with you, should tell you have a viable product, and that also should tell you that somebody down the range is going to buy it, and that's success. Yeah.
So it sounds like that those two inventions is really what sets you off, per se.
That's, I guess,
as far as the financial world.
It put me on this path, and it's weird now. It's instead of the ballistic stuff, now the new products are equine related,
like farm horse related.
Yeah. So it's a completely changing gears here, but I have learned that there is ridiculous money in the collective horse world. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, you go to like Tractor Supply and you see all the horse farms and everything. It's like, man, it's a big industry.
And people will spend money on their horse before they will spend money on themselves. So the thing about success is, don't just concentrate on one industry. Go where the money is. If there's a need in the equine industry, like the bucket,
right,
fill that need. So it's come a long way from shooting an AR-15 in mom and dad's lawnmower shop. It really has.
yeah, man. So what was your? Because I see all these cars on your Facebook page. What was like your first expensive purchase?
That would be the NSX.
What is that?
So the NSX is in America, it's under the Halo brand of Acura, but it's technically a Honda. Honda designed it. The NSX was, and still is today, not the new one, the first gen NSX was so far above its time. It was just a magical masterpiece of cars. It had the engine was a V6 that made a respectable. Now this isn't back in the day, this is in the early 90s. Made a respectable 285 horsepower. It had VTEC, which is variable valve timing, lift electronic control, titanium valves, titanium conrods, unheard of in a production car. To put things in perspective for you, this is a V6, okay, and it's just an extraordinarily exclusive car, and still are now.
Did they only make a certain amount of them?
Well, it was weird. They ramped up a factory at Tochigi to make it, and Honda hired 200 of the best car guys they had. You had to work at Honda for 10 years, and then they only picked 200 to build these. They're hand-built. See, Honda's known for building mass production little boxes, and they wanted to beat Ferrari at their own game. The NSX was made out of aluminum. It was hand-assembled and hand-hammered. You can go back and search the old videos, and you see guys there, just like they did with Lamborghini and Ferrari. I mean, they're hand-beating these aluminum panels to fit perfectly. They were making 25 cars a day. And for Honda, that is just ridiculous. Normally they make 25 cars a second, So, and the performance of these cars, so to put things in perspective, when this car came out, it was going up head-to-head against the Ferrari Testarossa, which cost about 1.5 to 2 times what it did, and more depending on the market. And they put them on a track. I forget the name of the track, but they put them head-to-head. And this NSX is deficient on horsepower, and it cost, a third as much. And it beat it by a second.
Beat the Ferrari?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
And you actually took ownership of one of these.
I had an NSX, and I was an idiot. I traded it and my other house for a helicopter.
Okay.
And I should have kept it because that car now has appreciated about 500%. So now, back then you could get NSXs all day long. I paid $25 for mine, and it had some mods done to it. Then I shipped it to Science of Speed and had some more mods done to it.
When you say you paid $25,000,
okay,
back in the day.
Back in the day, and that was fair market. Now a bone stock one runs you $100,000.
Wow,
bone stock, and they're upwards of $200,000 now, depending on the year of the model. See, some like one year they made like 5 with a tan interior and all this and all that, but they're ridiculous. Anything decent's going to be over $100,000.
So you traded that in for a helicopter.
I traded that and my other house, the house in Ridgewood, for a helicopter. Yeah.
And do you still fly? Did you ever get your license?
I do.
Okay.
I don't fly anymore. I sold the helicopter about 2 years ago. I wanted to kind of upgrade and buy a bigger one. That was a 2-seater. I'd like to have something with 5 or 7 seats, take friends flying, but I've landed at the house all the time. I'm the only, to my knowledge, based on what the county told me, I'm the only private residence in Floyd County with an FAA-approved helipad in the front yard.
In your front yard?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which part of Floyd County do you live in?
South side of the county.
South side, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I was telling you earlier, my goal is to get my flying license, man, but it's not cheap.
It's not.
It's not cheap. I was so shocked at how much they charge, per hour to give lessons in a helicopter. Mm-hmm. And the helicopter that I was training in was a Robinson 44, and it's got a lot of room, but they want to charge more for that chopper versus like the smaller 22. Yeah. But in the 22, man, I was all crunched up. And
you're a big dude, man. You'd be touching shoulders.
Between me and the instructor, we were crammed in there. He couldn't even put a full tank of gas in it because we were almost over the weight limit. So he's like, you might want to think about upgrading to the 44, but it costs more money. It's like $400 or $500 an hour, man.
It is, yes.
And I'm like, it's such a cool dream of mine. I'm going to make it happen somehow. But I do admire you for that, man. That's awesome.
Believe it or not, it's cheaper depending on what you want to do with it and how often you want to fly. It's cheaper to own it because see on mine was a 2-seater. It's a Schweitzer 300 CB. My actual operational cost was about $140 an hour
just to operate it.
So it's a whole lot cheaper to own it. Now you have insurance and you have maintenance and all this other stuff.
Right.
But, your actual, what we call consumables, your fuel, your oil, all this, you're not really counting time on the components. And depending on how you run the numbers, you either do or don't. Your total operational cost includes time on the components because eventually they'll time out and you have to replace them. So.
And, right here in Rome, there's an airport. And that's what is so, unfortunate for me is I'm like, we have this awesome airport, but nobody really does anything with helicopters out of this airport unless I don't know about them.
No, the nearest one was actually Mine Structure up in Calhoun, Ron Dobbs.
Yep, I've heard of him. Yep. But it's a shame that nobody has really, took off with the helicopter stuff here in Rome. I'm thinking there could be a market for it. Maybe that's waiting for me. Maybe
there's money to be made.
There is, because the company I was taking lessons from out of Atlanta. Prestige helicopter.
I know Micro. Yeah.
Yep. He stays so busy with doing like surveying,
tours,
weddings. They're even into gender reveals now, man, where they'll drop the smoke from the chopper.
Yeah.
Seems like a lot of avenues you could take to keep that chopper making money.
The thing about helicopters is the only time it's making money is when the rotors are spinning.
Right.
If they're not spinning, it's costing money, because the insurance on mine was $800 a month.
Dang.
If you don't have a place to keep it, I keep it at the house, it doesn't cost me anything. You have a hangar, that's $400 a month hangar rent. If there's one available right now, there's a year down in Cartersville at the Cartersville Airport right now. There's a 7-year wait for hangars.
7-year wait.
Yeah. So it can be very expensive if you don't have a place to keep it, and then you have your maintenance and
I would definitely have to go into it as a way to. Well, I say this now, but maybe I'll get to a point later on where I can just have one for personal use. But I would like to be able to make some money with it, not only for that, but for tax reasons too. Let your chopper be a business,
LLC.
So you can have some tax breaks there.
Well, that way your maintenance, your consumables, all that can be deductible because it's all part of the operational cost and expense of the aircraft.
What would be wrong with me? Let's just in theory say I buy a used chopper, and I want to go just take off to visit other shopping centers to think about opening a second or other smoothie nutrition shop locations. Mm-hmm. That whole trip's a write-off because it's business related.
It is. The only thing on that you'd have to make sure you check the box of is the thing with helicopters is if it's not your private property, you have to have permission to land on other private property. So as long as you had permission to land from whoever on that property to go check, put in a store there, you're great. So basically what it does, you have to ask yourself, and it's like owning a private jet. People say jets are expensive. Well, that depends. What's your time worth? A jet's not that expensive. The Lambo I used to have, they have appreciated so much that right now they're the same price as a Learjet. So I could have that car, I could have a Learjet. What's your time worth? Well,
you remind me of I follow a guy named Grant Cardone on the social media world, and he's the same thing. He's in real estate.
Yeah.
A lot of people think he was crazy for purchasing a private jet, but he's like, man, in the time you're playing around with emails and thinking about going and looking at a property and hopping on a regular flight. Yeah. I've done got there and bought it.
The deal's
and
done.
Checked it out.
The deal's done.
Right.
The disadvantage of a jet is you can't land at the property. You have to have an airport, then you have to get a car and all the disadvantage of a helicopter is it's slower, but you can land outside.
Speaking of helicopters, a lot of people, when I told them I was pursuing that, they were like, well, why helicopters? Most people do fixed wing. I just love helicopters. I think they're just a badass machine.
They are.
The fact that you can land
anywhere
in a field or on top of a building.
Versatility.
They're just all the way they sound.
Sure.
I just love them. I just absolutely. That's a Huey.
I love it.
He's pointing at a T-shirt over here.
I love it. Man.
I got this T-shirt at the air show. Mm-hmm. Last year, they were giving rides in the Huey.
I've been in it, yeah.
And that was my first time. I wasn't even expecting that. Mm-hmm. I actually was shocked, and I got my girlfriend on it.
Yeah.
And these guys were so great. The doors were off.
Oh yeah, they were Vietnam guys. Yeah.
And they just had fun with it, man. Like we got up there, and they were taking us around Armurchie.
Oh yeah, overbearing and all that. Yeah.
They actually took this thing and got it on like a good little G-force roll.
Yeah.
And my stomach
just.
Yeah. I'm like, oh my gosh, these guys are having fun with it versus like doing everything by the book.
Oh yeah,
keeping it
they're
safe.
all combat pilots.
Yeah, man, they know what they're doing.
Yeah, well, and that's like a Huey. I would love to have a Huey, but a Huey's $1 million up front. They're about $1,800 an hour to operate, and your insurance is going to be $60,000 a year. So you got to ask yourself, okay, do I need to spend that money on a toy, or do I need to spend that on another aviation asset that will generate revenue,
right?
Like a jet or a business helicopter or whatnot.
Yep.
Because those guys are a 501c3, so that's different.
Yep.
But if you have an aircraft based in your LLC, whatnot, and you use it for business purposes, then all of a sudden you got a tax deduction.
Yeah. So and then you got what's the difference between a Huey and a Black Hawk?
A lot.
Okay.
A lot. Okay. Yes. The Huey is 60s era, and the Black Hawk is 80s technology. I mean, we still use them today. They're just now figuring out what they're going to replace it with.
Okay.
But the Black Hawk is twin engine. It's much faster. It's much more powerful. It's multi-blade rotor head.
That is the unicorn of all helicopters.
Yeah, it's pretty ubiquitous. I mean, we use it, like 30 different countries use it. And you can buy them. You can buy a surplus Black Hawk. They're about 6 or 7 million, and then about 5,000.
You just take off. You would just have to take off all the military.
No, you can buy it ready to turnkey.
Wow.
The shops over near Fort Rucker, they sell them. They basically just refurb it, and they'll go through the aircraft, and anything that's got some time on it, they'll zero time the aircraft, and that's why you're paying $6-7 million for it.
And you'll have to put the wording on the side that says for experimental purposes only, or something like that, to get it insured. Yeah, I think that's what the Huey had on the side.
Experimental. And then at that point, you can give rides and things in it. But and those are probably what we call alpha chuck models. They're I doubt there's any Mike models in there. There may be some Mike models, but that aircraft, you're looking at $5,000-6,000 an hour to operate.
Jeez,
it's ridiculous. And then your insurance on it. My goodness, what would that be? So
I do want to keep on pursuing my flying license. I may pursue it in Calhoun, since it's right off the road, a little bit easier commute than going to Atlanta.
Ron's a good guy
to see Mike. So
if you go up there and you take training in the helicopter that's November 2036 Mike, that's my old one.
Okay,
that's the one I used to.
Little Swatzer.
Yeah, that's the one I used.
That's what he uses.
Yeah,
it's got to be. Yeah. It looks smaller than the R-22.
It's actually got a lot more room. It's got a lot more room.
He's telling me, I've never flew in anything but a Robinson, but he's telling me, and you tell me if you agree with him, but he's telling me the Swatzer, the one you're talking about, is a little bit easier and safer because
it's both. It's both.
Okay.
So it's easier because it's not nearly as twitchy. You got a fully articulated rotor system. It's a 3-blade. On the 22, and I did a little training in the 22, if you just think about moving your hand, the helicopter's moving.
Yeah.
The Swatzer has a conventional military type cyclic grip, and you have to do cyclic displacement an inch or two to get a response out of the rotor system. Now they're very nimble. They'll do what you ask them to.
Right.
But another advantage of the Swatzer is with that multi-blade system, and you have the fully articulated rotor, you don't have to worry about
mass bumping
and ripping the rotor off. That's exactly right. So it's much safer. It was originally designed by Howard Hughes' team in the 50s. It was the military version is called a TH-55, and it was designed to be beat to pieces by brand new Army aviators. That's what they took primary in at Fort Walters and Fort Rucker. All of your Vietnam pilots, they trained in those. That's what they cut their teeth on. So it was designed to be beat up pretty good.
Okay.
It's much safer than the R-22, particularly in a crash.
Right.
Much safer. I'm not going to go into detail because I don't want Robinson coming after me, but it's well known what they do when you crash them. They burn. That's well known. That's I'm saying what is public knowledge. They burn. Even a survivable crash, if it tips over, they burn.
Man.
So, but the Swatzer, which is why I picked it over the other helicopters, it's designed to be beat up by military students, and it's about the same speed as an R-22, but it's much wider, much more comfortable. Ron's a big guy. I'm not a big guy, but Ron's kind of a big, stocky guy, and we had plenty of room left.
Okay.
And it's got good range. B&E's 94 knots, so you're looking at 105, 106 mile an hour top speed.
Yeah.
We're just cruising around having a good time. You can't beat it.
Yeah, I love it, man. And back on the Ferrari thing, I was going to ask you, all I know is Ferraris are expensive, but like what in your opinion, what makes a Ferrari so expensive? Is it how it's made? Is it in my opinion, and a lot of people, they think, oh, well, they're just slapping on a logo, and it's no different than a Mustang. So like the Ford, GT Mustang, like what truly makes a Ferrari a Ferrari and costs so much?
Okay, so when you go to buy exotic cars and you talk about maintenance, so here's an example. I'll just back up just a moment. So like on my Ferrari now, a big service is like $3,000. On the Lamborghini I used to have, that Diablo Roadster VT, the 30,000 mile service. And this is what I caution people. They come into a bunch of money and say they want to buy cars. I'm like, that's fine. They're like helicopters. Buying them's the cheap part. Man. The 30,000 mile service, if you go to my Facebook page, that silver Lambo, that's it. I needed a clutch and a 30,000 mile service, and it was $27,000.
Why is that? Is that somebody just ripping you off?
No, they're very specialized parts. You can only get the parts.
So it's legit.
It's legit.
Okay, they're not just taking people.
And it's labor rate. You're not paying $30 an hour for somebody to work on your $500,000 car.
Right.
You're not making $30 an hour. And the vast majority of these services is labor. The parts are not bad. I had to replace the brakes on the Ferrari not too long ago, and it was $600 parts and labor. The vast majority of it is you are getting factory-trained technicians. Wade Williams, that works at Merlin Auto Group, is the only guy that touches my stuff, period. He's so good that the antique Ferraris that comes in there down at Merlin, he makes the parts.
Gotcha.
I mean, if you can't buy them, he makes them. I've watched him make parts for a steering box for a 308, the Magnum Ferrari 308 that he drove.
Yeah.
He was making part of the steering box because you can't find them anymore. So you're paying for the expertise of the technician, But when it comes to buying exotic cars, you can do two things. You can go buy a brand new one and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you're paying for what it costs to make the car.
Right.
Or you can buy a used one, and you're paying for what the car's worth.
But then if you buy a used one, you're probably gonna inherit some problems or maintenance.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Not
okay.
necessarily. And here's why I always caution people, particularly in the finicky, the early Ferraris, the 308s, the 328s. They had some maintenance issues. The new ones, they're fine. But and you talked about comparing it to a Mustang. So for instance, here's a good example. There's a lot of guys that have Mustangs, and I have nothing against
Mustangs. I used to have one.
They're not my kind of car. But if you think of it this way. So if you take the average Mustang driving around Rome, now this is not talking about price, it's talking about performance, okay? So if you go get a 488, you're making, so that the Ferrari would weigh about 2,500 pounds less and make 200 or 300 horsepower more.
Gotcha.
The law of physics are self-enforcing.
Okay, so it's way more than just slapping on a logo
way
on the
more
car.
Than this, and the technology in these cars, and you're,
right.
you're paying for the craftsmanship. Like a brand new Rolls Royce Phantom is $700,000. A Bentley GTC is $350,000, nicely optioned, because everything is hand built.
Gotcha.
The seats are hand stitched. If you order the Mulliner cross stitch option on your Bentley, I've actually seen the videos of the ladies that do it. It takes them 3 days to hand stitch the seats. You're paying their wages.
Gotcha.
So
there's some actual craftsmanship and
there is.
Legit.
The dash on a Bentley, I picked me out a Bentley GTC. They're a year out on order, so it'll be a while before it gets here. But the dash, it's all hand done in wood. All that it takes dozens of hours to make each one of those wood pieces that are done by hand. So you're not just paying, like on the Lambo, the Raging Bull, you're not paying $600,000 for that emblem. The Diablos, they were all hand built. The engine were hand built, and it's just the passion and the craftsmanship. Yes, you can go buy a Mustang or a Corvette and have a fast car, not a problem.
And the new Corvettes look sharp. I think they ripped off Ferrari.
They did, and they admitted that. They literally admitted that they copied the body style.
That looks just like almost like a Corvette right there on that wall right there.
So that's a 488 on your wall. The version before that is the 458, and that's what they copied. They copied the body style, and even their engineers admitted that they bought one of their engines off eBay and started copying the technology.
I'm assuming they earn a lawsuit?
No. I mean, you can buy a Ferrari engine off eBay and do what you want.
But Ferrari's not suing Corvette for copying their design?
They changed some things. But
so as long as it's not exactly, you can get away with it.
But they based the architecture. It's so what Corvette is talking about now is it has a flat plane crank. Okay, well, and they're I'm not knocking Chevrolet here, so don't send your lawyers after me. But they're saying that it's a big deal that they put a flat plane crank in this new Corvette. Well, that's great. Ferrari had flat plane cranks in the 80s, and they've been using them ever since. So,
to me, what Corvette did was a little wrong for
They admitted
closely copying, but it's kind of genius because they basically gave a lot more affordable Ferrari to the working man.
And from a business standpoint, since we're talking about business today, it makes sense because here, and I'm again not making bad comments about anybody, but your Ferrari owner, typically your passionate Ferrari owner is not going to buy a Corvette, and your typical Corvette owner either cannot or will not buy a Ferrari. So what they did is, and I've watched a lot of videos on this because I find the car to be intriguing, and what they did was intriguing. They went, look, we're missing a market segment.
Yes.
We've got the American consumer that doesn't want to spend $250, $350, $450 on a Ferrari, but they want to have something nicer and close to Ferrari performance, and we can get it to them for $100.
Wow.
And the market's there, and the demand is there.
Yes.
I mean, they can't make them fast enough.
No.
So good on them for doing that. But they did, in fact, blatantly state that they copied Ferrari.
Yeah, it's sharp, man. That's a sharp looking car. I saw one parked out in front of the shop the other day, and I'm like, we're just going to keep looking at it.
They're nice.
It looks sharp.
Yes, and their engines. They've had a couple issues with the engines too. Have blown up already, which is really not good. But they've had 2 lunch under the 600-mile break-in, and thankfully GM is doing what it needs to do and cover that. But and you ask about Ferrari, you're getting the racing history, the pedigree. You're buying a piece of automotive history. You're buying a. I was just detailing engine bay in mine yesterday. I'd used Q-tips to detail the whole car. You're buying passion. You're buying something that somebody hand built. There's no robots and doing all this stuff. You're buying passion. So is it expensive? Yes, but here's the thing. It's just like the Ferrari, the Lambo, NSX, pick your car, your Mustang, Corvette, pick your car. Regardless of how much that car cost, if you're up in the mountains and you've got the top down and you know, they come with stereos, but I don't use them because I'd rather hear the exhaust that I pay for. It's worth every penny. And that's the beauty of this, living in the greatest country on earth. It's whatever makes you happy. You know, you can justify however much it costs. That's hard to justify, you know, $12 million for a Bugatti, but that's okay. And that's another story entirely. But, you know, if you feel good about that purchase, good for you.
Yeah.
You know, because it's all about enjoying the car. It's just like a Rolls Royce. You know, they're hand built in Goodwood. The seats are, you know, granted you're paying BMW for their takeover of Rolls Royce. You know, the money's going somewhere, but you're buying technology and you're buying craftsmanship. Now, do I advocate spending $700,000 on a car? Well, that depends on your bank account, you know?
Yeah. So yeah, I'm not a super materialistic person. I like nice things, but it's not like I don't put it like number one priority, but right. That is kind of a goal of mine. Mm-hmm. And, you know, spending $300,000 or $400,000 on a Ferrari like that, I would like to see happen. You may tell me maintenance on it's going to be
it's not bad.
Okay.
On what you have up there is actually a 488, and you can get those now you get the Spider version, which is the hardtop convertible, for about $250. And your maintenance on that, unless you burn through a clutch or something, you're looking at about $1,000 a year.
And we're pointing at my vision board. I was showing Leslie my vision board. Allie's got one too, but if you guys, I'm real big on manifesting thoughts and ideas and either writing it out in a diary or putting it on a board. So make yourself a vision board. Like it can be even just something silly, but mine's got like beach house and the helicopter and a guy on his laptop on the beach. Little mailbox with cash in it. I want to be able to get to a point in my life where I'm not having to spend a lot of my time making money. I just got some passive income coming in, you know, from different angles.
Mailbox money.
Yep. And it's got the Ferrari up there. So yeah, I'm a dreamer, and I like to slowly start seeing some check marks in those boxes. I got some goals I want to hit by the time I'm 40 and 50. I'll be 39 this year.
Really? Okay.
So yeah, I got some goals. This is going to go. I know we're already past an hour, but I think our listeners would like to hear your opinion on this, and so will I. And I don't want to open another can of worms with this, and maybe we can keep it in
a box.
In a box.
Yeah.
In recent events, I just want to know, because I've seen you mention it on Facebook.
Okay.
What's up with these crazy balloons, man? I don't understand. I saw the first one come over. It floated around for like 3 or 4 days.
Right.
It's like, oh, we're going to watch it and make sure, we know it's here. I'm like, something just don't feel right about that, man.
So let me preface this conversation by saying I have no political affiliation. So
I don't want to get political
on any party.
I don't want to get.
Yeah, I'm not picking on any party. I'm just going to tell you, because I have both open source information, and with my contacts, I have not open source information. So the one that was shot down off the coast was obviously a very large Chinese spy balloon, and it's one of many. They've been seen all over the world. That's just the first one that, and it's funny that 20 years ago, that thing could have passed over and it wouldn't have been a great big deal. The government may have known about it, but they would have just kind of let it go. What stirred this up was social media. It was so big. Now, it was at 65,000 feet.
You could still see it.
You could see it. People were blowing up social media going, oh, it's a UFO. And it's over, Alaska, and it's coming down with illusions and all this. And at this point, the government's like, well, we have to investigate.
So it's much bigger than a hot air balloon.
It's the actual balloon was approximately 200 feet.
Whoa.
And the cargo bay under it, where all the electronic equipment was, which was, in fact, surveillance equipment. It was what we call SIGINT and ELINT, signal intelligence. And it's picking up radio signals, and it's gathering intelligence. And it just happened to go over, North Dakota and all the areas where the ICBMs are, which is a bit of a naughty. And it was controllable. It wasn't just a free flight balloon. They saw it change course. It had motors on it. Mm. So, we shot it down, and we've recovered the technology, and it was, in fact, a spy balloon. And I want to go back a minute. I'm a firm believer in extraterrestrials. They've been here for millions of years. There is documented proof in ancient carvings. There's documented proof in various countries' scriptures, whatever you want to call it. They've been here. We're kind of
and I believe that too. I would like to personally see or have an encounter.
Sure.
Where I can still live and walk away from it. But I always thought it'd be cool to witness it.
A lot of people have been in their presence. So I say all that to say this. The Navy has recently released here, and I think they're slowly getting the American people accustomed to, because if you just came out and say, hey, we've been talking to aliens for 60 years, it'd be War of the Worlds all over again. People wouldn't be throwing their TVs out of windows, they'd be jumping out of windows. So you can't do that. So this has been a slow but steady incremental release of information. And the Tic Tac incident off the Nimitz, which everybody knows about, has been on YouTube. Those obviously was technology that's not from here. There was one particular incident that wasn't on that particular video, but the GS radar system tracked, I think it was 8 or 10 objects. They were at 65,000 feet doing 130 knots, okay? And when they sent an F-18 to intercept them, they went from 65,000 feet to 500 feet in 0.7 of a second.
Wow.
So that would be, 5,000 negative Gs.
These are like
the little orbs.
Yeah.
We can't do that. We don't have anything that can remotely do that. So the object that was shot down off the coast, that was obviously a Chinese spy balloon. If you've noticed, however, the objects that were shot down, the later objects, they quit talking about. And the reason they quit talking about that is, and there was one object in particular that the fighter pilot described it thusly: a cylindrical object with no visible means of propulsion or aerodynamic control. Now, that's the guy who saw it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he's since been told to shut up, but that is what he saw. And if you look at a lot of now they're called UAPs, that's the new buzzword instead of UFO, that's what the government calls them. There's a lot of cylindrical ones. We've had a rash of UFO sightings lately. You're not going to go out and tell the American public we shot down an alien probe. That's just not what you do. Do I believe the other ones were balloons? Absolutely not.
Wow.
Absolutely not. The one off the coast was a balloon. The other ones, you can always tell there's something more to a news story when it's real big and then it goes away.
Right.
It's what they're not saying that should concern you, not what they are saying.
Man.
And the last story that they published on that to kind of cover it up is they said, and I'm not sure where this came from, but I've got a pretty good idea, somewhere up in the Beltway there. They said, we shot down some hobby club's balloon.
So that's what they wrapped it up as.
They wrapped it up as a science club's hobby balloon because the pilot said it's about the size of an SUV. I mean, not an SUV, an ATV. So think about this. And it was only 20,000 feet. Now that is a hazard to navigation for aircraft.
Right.
But, the military just released an image last week of a silver orb flying very fast over the battlefields of Iraq that one of their surveillance planes caught. There are a lot of orbs. They're called fast walkers. We catch them all the time. Some guy caught one on his drone filming somewhere. It's about the size of a football. We saw those flying over Iraq. They're not ours. And here's what's peculiar. You being in aviation, you'll appreciate this, and all our listeners that are familiar with aviation, you'll appreciate this. Civilians, NASA, the military, there's various entities that have recorded these orbs going extremely fast. And they're very low. They're under 2,500 feet. They're going Mach 5, Mach 6, okay? There is no acoustic signature. There's no sonic boom, which from a scientific standpoint says they're not interacting with the atmosphere. Because when you're going through the atmosphere at Mach 5, you're displacing the atmosphere, which would cause a sonic boom.
Right.
Everywhere you went. Of every recording, every taken. And they're flying over people's heads. There's no sonic boom.
Dang.
I can't wrap my brain around that. How do you get through the atmosphere without moving the atmosphere?
Yeah.
But there's no sonic boom.
So just based off what you just said, I'm like, in my mind, I'm thinking, I get the one legit Chinese spy balloon, but then the other ones could have been like aliens or UFOs. But how do you make sense of that? And why was all that going on at one time in the course of a couple of weeks? That's the weird thing.
That's the $1 million question is, there's been a rash of sightings of craft. I'll use the term craft, which is actually how they define it, a craft that we cannot quantify. I don't believe half what I see on the media. I don't. I learned that from working with governments. They're going to put out what they want the public to know. And they're not going to come out and say, hey, we shot down ET. They're not going to do that. Drew Barrymore would get pissed if we said we shot down ET. But, it's one of those things where they're not going to tell us.
Yeah, because I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, why would the Chinese send over a balloon with cameras to quote, spy? Are they surveying land? Are they land shopping?
No, the problem with that, here's the, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, here's the reason they did that. I think it's a dry run. And here's what I mean by that. So that balloon was between 63 and 65,000 feet. It was above the service ceiling of the F-22. He had to shoot that missile up. There was about a 6,000 to 7,000 foot discrepancy between his service ceiling and the height of the balloon. And balloons can go from, 60,000 feet, depending on the size, to about 150,000 feet, depending on size and payload capacity and whatnot. But what concerns me more than anything, and our near-peer adversary is not Russia, it's China. That is the new world threat is China. And it's kind of funny, not to get political here, but nobody cares about Russia. We can sanction them. Everybody has sanctioned them. We don't need them. China is sanction proof. If you go to Walmart, everything's made in China. Half the parts in your car are made in China. 95% of all the microchips and semiconductors and all that, they're made in Taiwan.
China's got it on lockdown, man.
China has it on lockdown.
Globally.
So they're sanction proof, and they know that. So what concerns me about that particular dry run, and they've done this to a lot of other countries, now that one has popped up, other countries are going, wait a minute, we had that happen to us. That is the perfect scenario for an EMP.
And that, for listeners that don't know what an EMP is, I think it's where you can basically put off like a silent bomb, and it makes all electronics go out.
Oh, it's not silent. It's nuclear.
Okay.
It's not silent. An EMP is an electromagnetic pulse. And you get an electromagnetic pulse from a nuclear bomb. So if you detonate a nuke high in the air, you get that EMP that originates from that point of detonation omnidirectionally. And it will fry anything and everything electronically. That's why Air Force One is hardened against EMPs. Dang. That's why your NORAD and all that is underground to harden it against EMPs. It fries everything. Vehicles, done. Computers, done. And if it's strong enough, it can actually set power lines on fire. So,
and there, our government was letting this thing fly over for a few days, knowing it could have had a EMP.
At that point, we didn't know, and based on the information I received from some of my sources, so that balloon had energetic material, which is in military speak for explosives, a self-destruct mechanism. According to the information I've received, when we picked it up coming over the country, number one, they didn't want to shoot it down then because of danger to person or property.
Right, I get that.
But they jammed it. And when they jammed it, they realized there was some SIGNET stuff going on. So they jammed it, which meant two things. It meant whatever it was trying to send back to China, it couldn't. And it also meant that if China tried to send the self-destruct signal, it couldn't. So they basically just let this thing come over the country. And then when it got – and we only have – here's what's funny. We only have the 12-mile border off the coast. And after that, it's international waters. We don't really have any jurisdiction to start shooting things down in international waters. You have to do it in the 12-mile territorial water limit. So they had to act pretty quickly. 12 miles is not that far.
So you're saying the word jam, that's like a thing that you can do to block signals going back and forth. That's like a real thing?
It was.
How do you jam something?
That's above my head.
Okay.
But that device, there was 2,000 pounds of equipment hanging under that balloon.
Right, yeah.
And we've captured, we've got most of it off the seafloor. It was only 45 feet deep where it landed, so that's pretty advantageous. But it was a spy balloon.
Man.
No doubt it was a spy balloon.
That's scary, man. I know we could talk about that for a lot longer, and conspiracy theories, and you could really drown yourself in fear about what could come. I mean, people have been thinking the world's going to end for decades, and
right.
and this ain't the first time I've heard of EMP. I know that's a real thing and can happen. I mean, to me, if you're going to totally just disrupt a country, that would be how I would do it if I was evil.
You shut it down. There's no commo. There's no power. There's no transportation.
I mean,
you'd lock a country down.
That's bad.
It is bad.
I mean, as much as I would like to prepare for something like that, I don't know if you could prepare. I mean, because you don't know where you're going to be when it happens. You don't know.
Here's back when I used to teach some of the classes at the shop, you can build a Faraday shield, which is basically an electronic shield that will go around sensitive electronic components. And I always tell people, if you want a standby vehicle, get something that's carbureted like my old Deuce and Half. I've got a 66 Deuce.
Just an old school car.
Get an old school diesel, old school car that doesn't have any electronics.
At least you got transportation.
That's
a good idea. Yeah, I like
get
that.
A four-wheeler, anything that, keep a four-wheeler under a metal shed. Well, there's your Faraday shield. So like my old 66 Deuce is a multi-fuel engine. If I had to, I could go out with a screwdriver and jump the starter off. I've got transportation.
Would planes fall out of the sky if that happened?
I don't know how. With the metal skin, it would be terrible. With the metal skin around the airplane, I don't know how the EMP would interact with the controls in there.
Gotcha.
The navigation and all that. I mean, you're talking, and then not to mention the radioactive fallout from a nuke going off 5 miles high.
Right.
That's not going to be healthy.
No.
So
yeah, depending on what area they do it in.
Exactly, and it hits the jet stream, and now it goes. I mean, like when Fukushima melted down. And Chernobyl melted down. We had measurable contaminants off the coast. So it doesn't just hang out in a local area. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Well, cool. Well, if you had to give, we'll wrap it up with this question. If you had to give listeners any kind of advice as far as, if they're in a situation where they're wanting more out of life, they have this desire to, do something bigger in life instead of just working in the oil pit. Mm-hmm. They have some ideas, but they're afraid. They don't really know where to go forward. Obviously, you offer services for that.
I do, yeah.
What would you say to that person that has those desires to, maybe they got a good idea, or they think it's going to cost too much money. Who was going to listen to me?
Right. Well, and it's just like you discussed earlier. One of the most valuable patents is the little plastic clamps on your shoestrings.
Yeah.
So number one, a lot of people will listen to you if you have, number one, a good idea, if you present it professionally and you sound like you know what you're talking about. So when you create a technology or you create a product, you are the SME. You are the subject matter expert on that product. So somebody's going to take you seriously. If you're a little local and you want to come talk to me, I'll be happy to help you. Again, it's on Facebook, Invention Consultation Services. I can talk over the phone. If you don't live local, seek professional help. Don't give your idea away. Find somebody that can help you. And if you think you can't afford it, then I ask you this. So do you want to be able to eat Outback, every day for a month, wasting your money on that? Or do you want to sacrifice and have peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for a month and save that money and then get a patent attorney and then, be able to buy Outback 2 years from now?
There you go. And that's a good point, because I'll often ask people, what's the risk of you not taking the risk?
Right.
If you stay where you're at for the next 5 years, mm-hmm. what's it going to look like if you didn't move forward with that goal or that idea?
Absolutely.
So I love that. I love that thought.
It's always worth the risk. I mean, worst case scenario, absolute worst case scenario, if you hire a patent attorney to do a patentability search, you're out $1,500. Well, if you think, if you go out with your friends or you go have dinner and drinks with a few times
over the course of a month, it adds up.
You've blown $1,500.
Yep.
And now you don't have your patentability search back yet. So change your priorities temporarily to focus on success. And success is not, going out blowing. If you got plenty of money, do what you want to. But if you're a little tight on funds and you have an idea you think could be very successful, you need to prioritize your financial expenses towards the success of this product. Whether you used to eat steak, go to Crystal, go to McDonald's, whatever, and make those sacrifices until this hits the market, and then you can have a steak 3 times a day.
I also read a saying that says if you don't sacrifice for your goals, then your goals and dreams become the sacrifice.
They do, and they will every single time.
Every single time.
Every single time. So, first thing, figure out what you want to do. If you think you have a viable product, then by all means talk to the right people.
And you have a page on Facebook that people can kind of keep up with you. You got your personal page.
I have a personal
you got
page.
Another one that's, what's it called?
I have like 5 pages. It's silly. I have more social media than a teenage girl. It's crazy. So I have my personal page, and then I have Invention Consultation Services, and that's basically for helping folks with new ideas. And then the car page is called the Duke Collection. That shows all the toys. And then
that's so cool.
Got a few new cool toys, and then the Duke Museum of Military History, which is kind of the museum stuff I do, the military side, and then I also, on top of all that, I also do training for the United States Department of Defense, firearms training for the Army and Marine Corps, and the name of that page to keep up with all that is OP-FOR Weapons LLC.
Man, I predict a second session with you because I feel like we're just now getting started, man.
That's fine.
But I think that's going to wrap up today's episode, and I appreciate you having you on, and you coming and joining us.
It's been fun. And if any of your listeners want to get in touch with me, feel free to reach out. You can get the information, and I'll be happy to help them. Yeah.
All right, Leslie. Well, we'll catch y'all next time. See ya.